Last talk of today will be done by Kelby Stein. Today Kelby will talk about the missing robot framework style guide. So let's enjoy that speak now. Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Kelby Stein, and I am a senior QA engineer at the company Sovos. I am also a composer, copyist, engraver, and performer. From my experience with the music publishing industry, I know that each publisher has its own house style guide. Conversely, my experience with software development, I know programming languages have similar style guides, except Robot Framework. When confronted with the absence of such a guide, many of us create our own, spending time researching best practices, delving through the documentation, and using guides from other languages. The problem is that Robot Framework is not Java, Python, JavaScript, or C#. It has its own syntax and should have a style guide that reflects that. Maybe it is time we create one. Let's set a framework of points to fulfill. I call them the three gnomes of an established language. Going with a theme here, you'll see later on. The first gnome is the technical documentation. Most established languages have a user guide, Java docs, something that tells you how the program works. The second gnome, style and best practices. Certainly, this is where the style guide lives. But also there's the training, there's the articles, there's always the tribal knowledge of using the language. And finally, enforcement tools, linters, static code analysis, those pieces of the CI/CD puzzle that we all know and love. So let's start with Java. Let's just look at some of the more well-established languages. First, let's look at Java. Technical documentation, have that. You can go to Oracle's website and read it down. Definitely has a style guide. Also, other companies have their own established style guides, like Google, for example. And finally, there are plenty of static code and analyzers and linters to enforce the rules and styles. Python, same thing. Excellent style guide through PEP 8, good documentation, a myriad of other tools for analyzing Python code, like PyLint, Flake8, Black. The list goes on and on. Let's take a look at Robot Framework, though. We've had the user guide since the beginning, and it has very good documentation as far as how you put together the keywords, how do you handle variables, how do you handle, organizing your code data, the nuts and bolts of Robot Framework. And recently, tools such as Robotidy and Robocop have been maturing to the point where they're really useful for linting and static code analysis. But as you know, really the only information that we can get as far as useful, how do you make it user-friendly, as far as examples, best practices, tribal knowledge, that exists, but we really don't have a single source of this is the minimum information we're looking for as far as user-friendly readable code. And why do we do this? we've survived this long. Why do we even need to create something like this? Well, before, tools like Robotidy and Robocop, all we had was tidy, really. And that was okay. But we really couldn't enforce the rules. But now we can enforce the rules, and we can actually define them. If you look at Robocop's section on all the rules, it's astounding. I'm like, well, why don't we make a document that reflects this? And this would be great for newcomers, because that's bullet point number 1. As someone's learning robot framework, wouldn't it be great to say, this is how you write good robot framework code from day 1? It tells you exactly how you put together the pieces, not just functionally, but just like making it user-friendly. Conversely, and I know I've done this multiple times, is I've had to create style guides similar to what Java and Python has, but for robot framework. And I've had to start from scratch, mostly pulling best practices from articles and trainings and the user guide. And wouldn't it be great if you were introducing robot framework for the first time in your corporation and you could just say, well, here's the style guide. And you just make the modifications to match with whatever your company actually uses. And clearly, we don't have enough to fight about in the Slack channels. Joking, really joking. Actually, I would say that the robot framework tribe out there is hands down the most polite crowd on the planet Earth. Maybe I can change that. So these are the areas that I'm looking at for actually creating a style guide. First of all, plenty of examples in the documentation. Tons of good examples in the documentation. Furthermore, we can take a look at other style guides and adopt that. There's a very strong link between Python and robot framework. Why don't we steal from the best? Pep8 is there, and I'm sure we can certainly borrow from there. But there might be some things in Java or JavaScript that we might want to pull in also. And finally, I want this to be remaining in the spirit of the open source world. I don't want it to be a situation where only one person creates the guide and then everyone either says, hey, I like it, or hey, I don't like it, or doesn't use it. So I want input from everyone here. So let's take a look at how this would work in the real world. So I got 3 cases. Case number 1, variables. We love variables. I like variables. So robot framework variables. This is a little game I like playing with newcomers to when I'm doing training for robot framework. I have them go through whatever training courses, either from Brian Lamb or the Test University or the user guide, and then I lay this on them. I say, guess the scope. It's a great game. So here we have a standard variable in snake case. Same variable, now it's constant case. Here's one in camel case. You can see a trend here in just a minute. All lowercase. That's a thing. I've seen that in reality. It might not be the most easy to read. Oh, there's another one. All capital case, but with spaces. And also lowercase with spaces. This is sarcasm case. I'm voting that this be the next version of casing for programming languages. The truth is, all those variables are treated exactly the same. And they could be of any scope. There's no right or wrong answer in robot framework land, but I'll get to that in just a minute. case insensitive, ignoring spaces and underscores, and no functional means of indicating scope. In other words, we don't have anything really built in that we can bake in the scope of a variable as we're declaring it. So that if we're using it later on, you know, it might throw an error or something along those lines. So what does the manual say? Well, it says anything global should be capital. Okay. Anything on the suite level of scope should be capitalized. And not just like capitalized, but like the entire thing capitalized, so like the constant case example. But it doesn't really indicate whether or not you need to use spaces or underscores or no spaces at all. It just says capital. So maybe we need to do a little bit of fine-tuning on our definitions there. The only time that you use lowercase is when it's a local variable. And that, I think, also applies to the arguments themselves. If you look at a lot of the examples, snake case seems to be the winner just because of the fact of how closely related it is to Python. As far, you know, if you're already making the libraries in Python, using the same kind of syntax in Robot Framework seems to make a lot of sense. Documentation. So the documentation section of the user guide is excellent. The only problem is it doesn't really address something that seems to exist in all the other languages, a concept of docstring. What do I mean by that? So let's take a look at Google's style guide. Let's borrow from something that already exists. Here's just an example. This is the way we can think about it. You know, if we have a keyword that has arguments, you know, we could list the arguments pretty straightforward and actually indicate the typing. You can even indicate any default values. You can further extend that to what a keyword actually returns. I have seen in documentation of proper like robot framework libraries that there sometimes someone remembers to actually put in the description what a keyword returns. Most of the time, it usually involves actually looking at the Python code itself to find out if a keyword actually returns something. And I don't want to have to do that. That's the whole point of docstring. You can even go so far as listing the type of asserts. Now, in the Google style guide, docstring actually says raises, but I think it'd be better to actually list the assert. So if you're doing a comparison, for example, in this case, it uses the keyword should be equal. That's the assert it's using. So whatever should be equal, and you maybe describe what kind of things you want equal. The fun part about this is, let's say you're using a server extension, such an extension from VS Code like the Robot Framework language server, and you highlight you highlight a keyword with your mouse. Well, guess what? You'll see like the arguments that it takes right off the bat. I mean, yeah, it lists it right up front. It's really cramped and kind of hard to read. But down the bottom, by having it listed out as a docstring, it's very easy to read and understand what's going on. We can even extend this kind of docstring concept to when you're declaring a variable as being a test-scoped variable or a suite-scoped or global. Now let's take a look at the final case, which is keywords and test cases. So here's your typical keyword and test case situation for a capitalization. This would pass Robocop scrutiny today. No problems using title casing for the test case name, and then also using capital casing for the keywords themselves. Let's look at another example. All lowercase. I call this the E. Cummings example. I've seen this quite a bit. Nobody wants to use the shift key for whatever reason. Yet you need to use the shift key to put the curly braces in, so maybe that's not exactly right. But this would not pass Robocop today because it out of the box it'll automatically say you aren't capitalizing everything correctly. Conversely, you could just completely remove all of the spaces. Or, going back to that sarcasm case, it'd be kind of fun. So if anyone's come up with a way of typing in sarcasm case easily, I want to talk to you because we have something going here. What I'd like to point out, though, is aside from the actual examples, there's nothing explicitly mentioned, at least as far as I could find. I could be wrong. I'm always allowed to be wrong. But I was not able to find anything in regards to title casing or capital casing listed explicitly in the user guide. I have found these examples, as far as articles or demonstrations, like training, that sort of piece, but really it's not written down anywhere. But yet we enforce it using Robocop. So does this really matter? Well, so let's take a look at the code conventions for Java. The introduction, and this is something they've written easily 20 years ago. I would almost say close to 30. I think the date is somewhere in the 90s. But the two bullet points that stick out to me is 80% of the lifetime cost of a piece of software goes to maintenance. Number 2, hardly any software is maintained for its whole life by the original author. Combine that with an excerpt from PEP 8, code is read more often than it is written. And quite honestly, when your robot framework code base gets a little bit on the large side and it's very hard to find out what any keywords do, having really good docstring, understanding what all the arguments are for, what pieces are returned, understanding the scope of the variables, that matters. You don't want to spend a whole lot of time looking at a test case trying to figure out how it operated. So to that end, we should have a style guide to control these things. But even if you have a style guide, let's just take a look at a quick example here. For example, even with the guidance, this example exists. This is a single line Java example. Apparently it's a working code block, but good luck figuring out what it actually does just by reading it. So finally, a call for guides. So I do not want to be the sole owner of the guide. When I was putting this presentation together, initially I was going to upload everything that I had put together over the course of my years of using Robot Framework and just push them to the repo and have a presentation here and saying, look what I did. But I was like, wait, no. If I do that, then I'll own it completely, and that's not fair to anybody, because I know there are many people here that have useful, practical ways of putting together a style guide besides myself. So I want the tribe to put this together. If you have a guide that you've created at your company that you're willing to share, that your company will let you share, that's important, please do. there are a couple ways of reaching me as far as submitting style guides or talking to me directly. First way would be to just ping the style guide channel that's now been created in Slack. You can certainly reach me. I believe I am the only Kelby in the Robot Framework Slack channel. So that kind of narrows that down. Second of all, we do have set up a GitHub repo, Robot Framework Style Guide. Pretty straightforward. Currently, there's only one file in there right now. It's a README file. But over the course of the next couple of months, over the next year, I want to start filling that in with all of the documentation. There's some points about how we want it to look, what format everything's going to be in. But right now, it just has the one README file.
Kelby Stein, everyone. Hello, Kelby. We have a few questions for you. First of all, someone asked where's the style guide, and you had the link there, so you can find it from GitHub. Then there's a question about, because Robot Framework repository already has a document called How to Write Good Test Cases. And the question is, what about this?
That is actually going to be one of the sources. So that's like telling you how to write a good test case as far as like constructing the test case. But it really doesn't go into like the details of it, like, do you use capital casing, lower casing, what kind of organization. It just kind of shows you the examples. I'm going to be pulling from that into the style guide. So that's going to be inclusive.
Exactly. Would it be possible to integrate with existing tooling? I think this might be tooling, but maybe you understand the question better.
Oh, like for as in like Robocop?
I'm guessing so. Yeah.
Well, certainly. So obviously, this is sort of like a baseline. The concept is this is going to be a baseline set of guidance that will be in alignment with like Robocop and Robotidy. Now, obviously, if your own house style is different, you can go in and change those rule sets. But this is like giving you like a point to start from.
Okay. Next question is from me. I was pretty sure that our moderators would not allow it to be here, but it is here, so I'll ask it. I missed the start of the talk, but what was the story of garden gnomes in your presentation? And I'm asking this because I've been told many times that I look like one.
I have probably an unhealthy fascination with the Tomten. I'm a composer, and I arranged this piece called Tom Tarnis Yule Knot for a concert band, and ever since then it's been downhill.
And there's one more additional question from the audience exactly about that. How many gnomes are in your room right now?
The last head count I made inside the house was somewhere around 50.
You might have a problem.
Hey, Rene has a few words to say to you and the audience.
Hey, thank you, Kelby, for this great talk. We totally are in your opinion that there is a big need for this kind of style guide. And we identified that also in the foundation, so we were really lucky that you were bringing a talk about that. And there is actually a work group starting in the Robot Framework Foundation. And the good thing is had not yet kicked off, so we are still on the search for members, for people that want to contribute. Kelby, we definitely would count you in. I think. Could we agree on that?
Oh yeah, we can totally agree on that.
Yeah. So okay. So we have one more work group member here. So if you are eager to work with that and you think you have a good opinion about what is a good style and want to contribute, we're really willing to do that and want to release an official style guide that also collects the opinions of the community to something like, we got a pretty good recommendation of a name actually already in honoring of someone who wrote some piece of software called Pack 8. So that would be maybe something we could do. So thank you, Kelby, for to the US and good talk.
Thank you. And let's show our appreciation to Kelby by making a lot of noise. Thank you, Kelby.